tried. Yeah, it is. Well, we are officially recording now.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We've got Eric, Richard, Brian, and Bob, which would constitute a quorum.
Great.
And so that's good.
If everybody makes sure their red lights are on their speakers, on their microphones, sorry. Okay.
Okay. So we have a presentation to start things off with on the Willamette Falls Legacy Project.
Yeah, I'll introduce Kelly really quickly.
Okay.
Kelly Misberger is Assistant Planner with the Oregon City Planning Department, and she is also co-managing the Public Involvement Project and for the Blue Heron. And so she's going to give us a brief discussion about that. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks for having me. This is actually the second official community conversation.
Mike, pull your mic up until you're ready to do the thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's there so we can hear the video later.
Yeah. You want to put your mouth up fairly close to it, too. There you go.
So this is the second official community conversation that we're holding for this project, so you guys get to be somewhat of a guinea pig group. And it's my first community conversation. So we're gonna, I'll show a very short video, short PowerPoint to introduce you to the Willamette Falls Legacy Project, and then we'll have a short conversation about your vision for the site, and I'll have comment forms for you to either fill out here and give back to me, or to take home and then email or get it to me some other way. The comment form that you get will also be a survey on our website fairly soon, so you can also do it that way. But we want to take everyone's input in order to form the vision. So that's how we'll use your comment form. And the website is rediscoverthefalls.com. So we'll start with the video.
Stories of comings and goings hang in the mist like ghosts.
Coyote and meadowlark took a rope and stretched it across the river, and they walked down the river trying to figure out when they wanted to drop the rope and create the Willamette Falls.
Stare for a while, and you sense an atmosphere of promise, of potential.
It was a focal point. It was a gathering spot. It was a place of power. And each culture that has come through got to the falls and stopped and thought about how they could best utilize what nature had created.
A fluke of geology, Willamette Falls elbows 1,500 feet across the river that shares its name and rises 4 stories high.
I really believe this is one of the great geological secrets of North America. It is the second largest waterfall in the United States. Volume-wise, the only one being bigger is Niagara Falls. People don't even realize that.
Human history has concentrated around this natural feature in unusual abundance.
Indian people have been at the Willamette Falls since time immemorial. Since thought of human people became conscious, we've been there.
Political and economic power and people's livelihoods have ebbed and flowed at the falls.
This hasn't moved since 1990, and it's still sharp enough to cut trees. God, there was how many million board feet of timber went down this river?
A state was born here, Oregon.
This was the end of the Oregon Trail. This is where people stopped and settled.
And this is where moving water revolutionized how people live. Forever.
There's so many firsts here that have implications not only nationally but globally. that changed our way of life. And it all started right in this little mess of buildings that most people just drive by on 205.
Industry rose up around the falls. To the east, in Oregon City, a paper mill. To the west, another paper mill. And one of the oldest power plants in the country. Alongside, a historic canal and lock system. Altogether, perhaps 100 acres. A small, vibrant laboratory.
This was like NASA. This was like the Silicon Valley, and it really changed the world.
Okay, so that's actually a video from Portland General Electric. So we really appreciate their permission to use this. It's about a 20-minute video, but that's the first 3.5 minutes or so. So let's get to this PowerPoint here. So right now we're in a stage of a project where we're doing the vision and master plan. It's a 9-month process, and generally we're working to ensure that the transformation of the site through private investment supports the community's vision for the future. And in 2011, Metro, Oregon City, Clackamas County, and the state joined later, looked into potentially acquiring the property, as I'm sure you know. At this point, the public partners don't have the resources that are needed to purchase and operate the entire site, but the partnership remains committed to being a catalyst for the transformation, and they've adopted 4 core values to guide that transformation. That's public access to the falls, economic redevelopment, cultural and historic interpretation, and a healthy habitat. As the local governing body, City of Oregon City is the leader for the master planning for the project. We've hired Walker Macy and a large consulting team to help us with that. A little bit about the site. I think some of you may have had a tour at one point, but there are over 500,000 square feet of vacant industrial buildings, 57 separate structures, including the foundation of the 1865 Oregon City woolen mill. Preliminary studies indicate that the site does have potential for adaptive reuse, and portions of the site are in the floodplain, the Natural Resource Overlay District, and the Geohazard Overlay District. There really isn't much soil there on the site. Everything's basically, infrastructure, concrete. So there's not much contamination there upon the preliminary studies. We have a few images to scroll through. So it's inside of paper mill number 4, I believe. That's PGE, holding pond, and there's some of the structures. So the vision, master plan, and rezoning process is going to last 9 months. We're hoping to take the rezone master plan application to the Planning Commission in April of 2014. So we're starting with these community conversations with various community groups and organizations such as the Natural Resources Committee this summer and fall in order to develop the vision and then come up with alternative scenarios for the master plan, and then we'll continue to reach out to the community in that second phase of the project. But today we're asking you what's the most important thing on the site. What's your vision? These are big picture goals for the site. The master plan is going to be based on the vision, and it is a general layout of the site. Where the road's going to be, where the building's going to be, where's the open space going to be, and master plan is not a very specific plan, and so the goal there is to leave some flexibility for private development to come in and, you know, have a financially feasible project while still guiding it to ensure that the community's vision is implemented. So we're balancing certainty and flexibility with the master plan. I mentioned the 4 interconnected core values, and those are meant to be synergistic so that what benefits one value also benefits the rest. Recent news, you've probably heard the state approved the $5 million to prepare the site for redevelopment. That includes some demolition of buildings that are found to be unsalvageable and other structures that won't be reused, and infrastructure upgrades. But this process is going to happen before that. So the $5 million for site preparation will be, you know, based on any plan that we come up with here. Eclipse Development has expressed interest in purchasing the property. There is a legal process that's happening this summer, and there will be a period for others to overbid. And so we're actually pleased that, you know, there is private development interest in the property, because it will likely, you know, speed up the redevelopment process rather than, you know, having a really long and drawn out, you know, looking for private developers over many, many years. All right, so we can get into it now. Go back to that one.
Could I ask
yeah.
a question before? Did you say there's $5 million? I believe I saw this in the paper that was allocated by the state to do what? Restore the site? Did you say?
Preparation of the site for redevelopment. So
Meaning
that includes
taking everything down.
Well, we don't know what's going to be
Okay.
taken down yet, but yes, demolition and infrastructure to prepare the site for, you know, some sort of development.
Okay.
Along that same line, who is administering those funds? Is the city? And will they do the contract work on site or what?
I don't think that's clear yet. Because the site is currently owned by the bankruptcy trustee, and, you know, when in a year or two when that funding is coming, I think it's going to depend on who owns the site. But, you know, there are strings attached to it to ensure that, you know, this the money will be, that there will be some public access to the falls as part of the
Last
project.
question on that subject. Wasn't there a $5 million match requested to match that state money? Or was that requirement?
There's no specific language about a match.
Okay. One of your counselors was seeking to match the $5 million with federal money, I believe.
Oh, yeah, we're still seeking other funding, definitely.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, now who's paying for the actual plan?
The master plan?
Yeah.
That's the City of Oregon City, Metro, Clackamas County, State, and the bankruptcy trustee of the site contributed some as well.
Okay, so the $5 million is not being used for that also.
No.
Okay.
I've got a question, and thinking of this site as a totality. Even though obviously Blue Heron's no longer operating, there's still electricity being generated over on the West Lynn side, and I assume there's water rights then probably for the electrical generation plus the paper plant.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the reason I'm asking is in a lot of waterfalls that have a lot of impact, they have sort of a natural appearance, and I'm trying to figure out if some of the concrete ledge, you know, that the site's been modified, you know, for Blue Heron, I guess among other things, it means that there's any potential to restore more kind of a natural configuration of the edge of the waterfall. But I guess you got multiple things you're trying to, you got to make sure the fish can get up, have enough water to get the fish ladder and generate the stuff. Pete, maybe you have any insight on? I'm just.
Yeah, Bob. Well, I think PGE still owns their facility there, so, and still generate power from that. So,
On the west side.
Yeah,
On the
and
west
it's kind of
side.
a Z-shaped piece of property that adjoins the Blue Heron site. So,
Well, PG is not generating at that site anymore.
no,
I
okay.
can tell you
All
that.
right. But
But
they
on the
own the
west side,
property.
TW Sullivan plant is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So,
I-
okay.
Is there any potential to restore?
Bob, can you talk into your mic?
Okay, sure. Is there any potential to actually restore the edge of the falls to a more natural configuration?
There is potential.
Yeah,
Okay.
and lots of potential. Yeah.
Yeah,
PGE does own that, and we're working closely with them. But you can see in the map up on your screen, the cutout that goes into the site, kind of, that's PGE property, and then the falls actually is owned by PGE. They owned it before there was any state agency to take ownership
Do
of that.
they own like the whole lip or edge all the way
I believe-
around, both sides?
I believe so.
yeah. And I believe that wall is to enhance their ability to produce power there. And so that would be a big problem for them to take that out. So I think
That
we have
wall was
problems.
built in 1928. It's a 12 feet
The Z.
rise that they created there. And this is amazing to me. You'd love this. Every inch of rise you create at the falls goes all the way to Newburgh. There's no fall for 26 miles all the way upriver to Newburgh. So if they were to lower that, as you were suggesting, they'd have to figure out a way to keep the flow going for TW Sullivan. But it's an amazing little system.
Yeah. Also, I noticed there's evidently a rail line that comes in from the southwest, and there appears that the site continues out that. Is that correct?
Yes, the rail line, it's a railroad easement that goes through this, on the edge of the site there.
Yeah.
You can-
So does that extend out to where that rail line connects with the current main line? Or how far does that go? You know, it's sort of a curious little thing.
I'm not sure. I mean, the dotted line that you see on your map, that is the
That is the rail line.
main rail line.
Okay, so this would be between it and the river?
It's
Or-
between the site and 99.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, she's
So I'm just going to write down questions and comments.
Yeah.
I think assistant.
Kelly can facilitate.
Okay, so the questions we're asking you are really generally and broadly looking into the future. You know, it's the year 2035. What do you envision on this site?
I'd like to ask a question on the funding again. I think you.
We're asking the questions.
Oh, please let me ask one. I think you said that the partnership did not have the money to actually buy the site or something like that. Is that?
Yes, I said that the partnership doesn't have the resources right now to purchase and redevelop
And do it,
and
okay.
maintain and, you know.
Okay, so right now there's been 4.1 million offered for the site through the bankruptcy court, but that could increase with further bidders. Is that the way I?
Yes, I believe that's. I'm not sure what the offer is,
Okay.
but I know that there is an overbid process
Okay.
time.
Is this Laura?
Kelly.
Kelly, I'm sorry. All right, now I get it here. I'm sorry. I put my contacts in wrong this week, and my eyes are very upset with me right now. I put them in backwards. My comment was going to be, you know, the site is a long linear site. It has a lot of facades that are natural, basalt cascades that go into pools. The tide came in twice today, like it does every day during the summer, filled those pools, and there are fish that have gone in there. I think there'd be opportunities to celebrate the tide. They do that at Tanner Springs in Portland, in the Pearl District. Celebrating the tide on the site is a significant thing because it's 5 feet. Not now, but in October it will be 5 feet. Today it's about 3 to 4. That's one thing I think. The other thing is I don't know whether all the buildings are to go. I know you want to retain perhaps some historic structures. Yeah, I think you need to look carefully at what is workable and what is not. But I don't know how you deal with a site that's, 200 feet deep by 23 acres long? It's roughly what it is, maybe 300 feet deep. Very narrow site.
Yeah, and then you've got, Tony had given a presentation last week talking about how much land is actually under the first level that you see. Probably about 7 or 8 acres of just infrastructure underneath with various pilings and cement structure underneath there, which is but in the floodplain. Yeah.
Pete, could you go over a little bit? I guess what I'm looking at is you have all this kind of public involvement and participation, but if the private organization purchases the site, could you identify exactly how this community's goals interface with a private for-profit organization that owns the site? Because it's kind of like we may want to do all these kind of things, but if they're profit-driven, which I'm assuming for-profit companies are, how does all these multiple objectives they're looking at for the site get reconciled with the for-profit company's purchase and redevelopment?
The site's currently zoned industrial still, and so any developer that wants to do anything other than industrial, which we found that there hasn't been any interest from the private development community on an industrial site right there because it's so constrained, and so any developer will have to seek a zone change and a master plan from the city. So we're just being proactive now and trying to get started early, and we would any private developer, we would hope to bring them into this process, into the public process, because ultimately they'll need that zone change, and this Oregon City Council, City Commission is going to have to approve anything that happens there, essentially. So.
I was a little surprised when a bid came in this early because you have no idea what the zoning is going to be yet, and how much is going to be available for development and how much is going to be open space. That's has yet to be decided. So any bid now is really premature in a sense, but it does express their interest at least and get their foot in the door as far as that. So.
Regarding the bid, and I know there's maybe not an answer for this, but I'm just kind of, the way it hit me was that seems like a really low bid, for that kind of property. And I don't know, I guess it costs a lot to develop the site and so forth, but it just seemed like it was very low.
Yeah,
and it seemed like that, that there could be public sources maybe to buy that site, maybe turn it into something other than residential, industrial, commercial site.
So your vision is more of a public?
Well, my vision, I guess, would be a mixed-use facility of some kind, but it's got such an environmental, cultural significance. I think that should be a big focus.
I wish we could see it from the river. And Brian and I plan river tours, and this group will go on a tour somehow. I'll work it out. But to see it from the river, it's a totally different perspective from the land. And you talked about habitat issues. This is a basalt shelf, and there's opportunities to do a lot of, I think, infill, if these are catacombs, shall we say, that you're dealing with underneath, and create some habitat values. It has limited habitat value unless you are a lizard. It's tough going there. It is. There is I don't know if you're aware of this, biggest conclave of cliff swallows in this part of Oregon live on the concrete abutments of their building. You know about that?
No, I don't.
And that's a significant thing that you should be aware of.
What are they? I didn't get that.
Cliff swallows. Mud
Oh,
nests.
swallows.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
They like the concrete structures there.
living on the site and the
Yeah, they're on
concrete?
the abutment of the environmental building that
Oh.
overlooks the river. It has a guardrail in front of it to protect it from logs, all that, you know.
Did the city of Oregon City actually start right there? Was
Yes.
That was downtown Oregon City at
That
one
was
time?
the original
Kelly?
city.
What, can you tell us about that a little bit, or?
Yeah, Main Street did go through the site. It extended, so First through Fourth Streets were there. John McLaughlin's house was there, and then it was later moved up on top of the hill.
Where was it exactly? Do you know where?
I don't know exactly where
I
it
think
was.
Jerry might know. Where was it on the map?
3rd Street.
On the map, on the
And
graphic?
The 3rd Street is within the mill complex. That's what
Okay.
it was.
Yeah.
John McLaughlin. I can't show you
Okay.
on this map because I can't even see the map. I mean, come on, you guys.
It seems like that would, there could be some kind of historic restoration or something related to
Right.
historic Oregon City.
Sure.
Yeah, one of
As
the
far as the
Bring
part
the
of the
house back
cultural.
down.
Pardon me?
You could bring the house back
Back
down.
then, then it would flood, right? But I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of potential there for various things.
Yeah, there's a lot of unusual things there. I saw that when they built the original streets, it was quite low there, so they built it up to about the level it is now. But they used basically squared off tree trunks, and when they put in the current pavement, they just sawed those off and left them there. They're still there from who knows 150 or more years ago. They're still down there because they're completely protected from weathering.
Right.
But there's really only going to be room for perhaps one road in this, so designing the layout is going to be really important. And but we all know that there needs to be some open space along the river,
Right.
and that's one of the important things. And how much that's going to be is one of the big discussions here. But then I came up with an idea reading about a factory that turned out to be an economic engine for a small town in Oregon. That was a statuary casting factory where they cast statues. It's an enormous tourist draw, and yet it's an industrial use, but they have retail sales and viewing and things like that. It's a huge, huge draw.
Where's
And
that?
Enterprises?
Enterprise, yeah, which was in the middle of nowhere, and this guy builds a factory there, and now it's a thriving little town.
I was going to say for a second, I know there's petroglyphs, right, Indian carvings on rocks somewhere in those sites,
Mhm.
and I know that there's still harvest of like lamprey eels, and not to mention the whole Endangered Species Act stuff. But what kind of formal role or input are you going to be soliciting from descendants of the tribes that were in the area?
Good question. We have invited the
And Ron.
5, yes, and 5 actually separate tribes that have historically,
Yakima.
been here. I don't think I could list all 5 of them off right now, but we've invited them to be part of the process in whatever way they would like to be involved. So we're not quite sure how that's going to work yet, but they, we've reached out to them early on so that they can play a big role if they want to.
Wait, is there a real cultural resources inventory right throughout that site right there, pre-European?
Well, there may be stuff that we don't know about because it's
Right.
either proprietary or unknown.
Yeah.
But there's some.
Well, there is some petroglyphs viewable from the river, but they're limited, and they definitely need, to be watched over. And but they had fishing platforms, all of which are long gone. There was just an Oregonian article on where a photographer accompanied, I think it was the Yakima, if I remember right, to fish for lamprey, and that was a real interesting article that's worth looking up. It's online now, so it was just less than a month ago that came out. So So they are actually, that is a culturally significant fish for them, so.
Has the partnership started to look at any case studies or precedents of repurposing of industrial sites? Because I can think of a couple examples, both good and bad. In Germany, there's a place called Duisburg Nord, which was a large, I think, coal plant or aluminum smelter of some sort, which they repurposed but preserved a lot of the industrial ruins, which, from my vision, I would love to see that at this site.
There's mill ruins in Minneapolis.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Sites like that. There's also
Metro did look into a lot of precedent projects. So they've looked at the one in Germany you mentioned, and Milwaukee and Gasworks Park in Seattle.
Yeah.
Several others, and it's been difficult to find a similar project that's in a similar sized city. There are a lot of examples in larger cities than Oregon City. And so, as far as looking at what sort of what the economic development potential is or the tourism potential is, it's really hard to say. But Metro, in their due diligence, along with Oregon City and Clackamas County, did visit some of those places and, research them to gain any insights.
Again, I'd love to see as much of the industrial character retained as possible, because there's too many unfortunate examples where a company factory town that's been around for 100 years, once it closes down, it's just wiped completely off the landscape with no trace of its existence. And this site is just so culturally rich that I think that there needs to be some preservation of those artifacts and ruins. So.
Yeah, the older they get, the more important they are. There's some really old stuff in there because the first industry was put in around 1830, and that's a long time ago. And I don't know if there's anything left from that far back, but there is from not too far later.
The 1865 flour mill?
Yeah.
Is the foundation of that is still intact.
That's the one with the drain, the big drain, arch drain, and all that. So, yeah, so that stuff needs to be preserved. But there is stuff that's, like cement rings that used to have tanks on them. There's a lot of those. I don't know how significant those are, but they show something. But are they something people would want to go see?
Somebody mentioned traffic and access earlier, and when you look at the graphic on this, you would look at it and might automatically think that an extension of Highway 99 along the river all the way down and then coming back out would be the access. However, I think that would really be a bad deal because that just puts another highway next to the river.
Well,
exactly.
You could put the highway next to the railroad tracks.
Well,
that would be
maybe
200 feet of buffer between it and the river.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
But regardless, there's going to be a huge traffic issue plus parking issue in there, no matter what you do. I just hate to see a highway next to the river.
Right. Since we're talking about issues above and beyond everything, the mill served as a buffer for the floods from coming right down Main Street. There's a large seawall at the upper end, which is where the zigzag comes across there, jog, that kept the floods in 1986 and 1964 from rolling right down Main Street and flooding everything. So, and that wall is intermittent. They put timbers in there to make it secure, build it up. So whatever happens, you got to look at the flood issue. I mean, during high, massive, 100-year floods or more, it's an issue. I wrote down the name of the Cow Creek Tribal Center in Roseburg, and the contact person, the public affairs officer, I know personally, she lives nearby here, because that's as Eric was saying, a restored industrial site. And they also restored salmon and other spawning stream elements, created a lot of habitat, the Cow Creek Band of the Roseburg Indians, and it's here for you if you want to take it with you. Because that might be a model that's local to talk to. And they got a lot of state funding because of what they were doing.
Can we continue, I guess, while it's just being passed out? You know, the one thing I'm thinking about in talking about access to the river and recreation opportunities, you know, for a long time, fishing for the sturgeon off the wall was kind of a multi-generational tradition, and I know that was closed down, I think, due to concerns about, you know, spawning sturgeon and things. But I think thinking about access to the river and opportunities is exactly what is it that people would be able to do. They get close to the river because, you know, on one hand, you know, people could just take pictures, stand in front of the waterfalls or whatever, but we're just kind of passive, kind of a overlook thing, or are we actually talking about people being able to feel the spray in their face and cast a line or something? I think we want to look at that because there seems to be more and more a tendency to kind of put the natural resources. If you go up Multnomah Falls now, you can't go down to the creek. I mean, you're way up high. You can't do what people did for generations. And I'm just kind of curious with this site, if we're thinking about access, if we're thinking about connecting with people, how close are people going to get and what are they going to be able to do?
Really good. It's good.
I mean, not that we want kids jumping in the river and going downstream.
Well, those
but
tidal pools I was alluding to, there are probably a couple of acres of tidal pools that fill up automatically in front of you within 30 minutes. Huge changes. And Indians use them for fishing, too. Do you want these filled out now?
You can fill them out now, or and I can get them at the end of your meeting, or you can take them with you, and then either get them back to Pete somehow, or email them to me, mail them to me. My contact information is on the bottom of the back page. So please fill. We are going to digest what Pete wrote down here and report back, but really the comments that you put on that form are going to be actually typed in and taken and used probably better than we can use the conversation that we just had, but hopefully that's bird some ideas and gave you some fodder to work with to fill out your comment form.
Not all the community conversations will be on video, but this one will.
I'd like to add one last thing and encourage the decision makers on this to really think outside the box and be creative in how people can interact with the entire site. That's the river, the falls, and the industrial site. I think, again, going back to the German example, I mean, it's become a place of performances. They've created performance spaces. They've created rock climbing on the rock walls. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity to do something that's not kind of the simple or traditional ways of how to interact with the site. And I think this is an opportunity to do something really special if we again can think outside the box and look towards some of the other examples that are out there, again, going back to case studies, precedents, and trying to do something special with the site.
kind of echoing what you just said, there was a wonderful public TV program about the Native American tribe that built this incredible ledge that looked out over the Grand Canyon. Mm-hmm. And it's an architectural marvel because it goes way out there farther, and they had to have a brand new design for it, but it gave people a chance to experience the Grand Canyon in a way that nobody ever did before, and it became a real asset for the tribe and a real tourist destination. And somehow, if there can be enough vision or leadership to, like you said, think outside the box, you could have something in some way like that here.
Yep. You showed a picture in your little clip of the falls of Raymond Bensky. I grew up with Raymond. His dad was probably the finest archaeologist, amateur in this area, and probably has the greatest collection still within the family of things around the falls. And you might want to get a hold of him. He lives over in Willamette District of West Lynn. He was the paper maker, sawmill guy that you showed in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest potential conflicts is that this is the perfect tourist site. But the question being is how much are you putting towards tourism and how much land is going to be put towards the other potential uses of everything from limited industrial, housing, office, retail, because this is an exciting site. It's world class, and how much are you going to cater to just tourism? You know, the more open space, the better for that, but then there's less space for the other uses. So finding that perfect balance is going to be the real challenge here. So.
I think we got a lot of information here, and then we'll get what's on your comment forms. And
If there's one thing I can bring up too, a long time ago when we talked about this, we said that this committee would have a pretty significant role in the planning process and review process. And, in thinking about that, there may be a need for additional training or information because this may be of a different scale than people are used to tackling, and the time demands of the preparation to be productive and effective. I think the city would want to think about how to prepare members at that time to play a constructive role.
Yeah. One aspect of tourism that may end up being part of this is the trolley bridge, which Metro is looking at. I don't think they've made a final decision if they're going to go ahead on it, but basically they would turn the trolley bridge at the end of, on the north end of the Clackamas Cove development area into a major pedestrian and bicycle route, which would connect directly to Portland, and that would go through the Clackamas Cove development onto Main Street, which goes right to the Blue Heron site. So we have potential for day trip bicycle runs from Portland to the falls and back, which is an enormous tourist potential, I think. And the in thing in the tourist industry now and the planners is bicycling, because bicycle people spend money, tourist money, and even when they're somewhat local, that's still one of the best destinations you could pick out if you're wanting to actually go to a beautiful spot. Absolutely. Where you could bicycle up and see the falls. So that's one aspect that's out of our control, whether or not it's going to actually become reality, but it's something that would be very, very good if it does come through.
thanks very much.
Yeah.
Here's
please.
conclusion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please stay engaged through our website, and I'm sure Pete can give you updates at your regular meetings. And I'll have to schedule another time to come back when we're at a different phase of the project, so you guys can comment on our alternatives and on the final master plan. So I'm sure we'll be someone, maybe not me, but we'll be back to have a second, maybe third conversation with you. But thank you so much for this. Please give me the comment forms today or soon. And you can sign up for updates on rediscoverthefalls.com and see lots of great pictures and everything. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you work with Laura?
With Laura?
Do you work with the planning department?
Yes.
Or here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you work? Is Laura back?
She is.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Watercolor effect. The screen's going on, in other words.
I took some pictures when we were filming The Hunted, and they had just like incredible sunset that day. Tommy Lee Jones was right at the base of the falls.
Neat. But Oregonian article I was mentioning has the perfect picture at the base of the falls. It's worth looking up. Now, let's see. We've got to get back to our packet.
Click again, huh?
Yeah, then you get back to the packet. And if you want the agenda, you have to tap on that.
Nice
Let's see
job.
what we're doing here. We had something else to do.
Derek
didn't we?
didn't think I knew how to operate it earlier.
Couple of them, good. That's brilliant.
Because I didn't.
Thank you.
Remember. So thank you.
Okay, so Pete, you said you had some minutes this time around.
Yes, indeed. So, I don't know if you've had time to look at those minutes, but if you did, if you had any suggestions for corrections or edits to them, but if not, then you could make a motion to adopt. So these are from the June 12th, 2013 minutes, the meeting. And if you need more time to review those, we could table this until subsequent meeting. Or we can just take a little while.
I just don't see a lot of comment in here about when we were looking at the proposed priorities that we would seek. Some of us had, other ones we added. And now they're in the list, but I don't see them being referred to in the minutes.
Right. Well, we deliberately do not put a lot of detail in minutes because
Okay.
we don't have the staff time and resources
All
to
right.
do that. But we have the video,
Sure.
which is the legal detailed record.
Right.
So if we make a mention of talking about the priorities in the minutes, then that's sufficiently legal.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Okay, is there any discussion on the minutes? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve
I
them?
move that we approve the minutes as promulgated.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'm going to state that that's passed by consensus vote.
Great. Thank you. And
Okay, then it's on to the revisions to the work plan.
okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. What we're being asked to do is, they've already been ranked. Is that what everyone got?
Yeah, what I attempted to do, and
Okay.
what was, I scanned everybody's comments that was sent to me, and then I put them in a chart. So that's so anybody who had a comment that was in addition to the ones that staff had suggested, we added that. And we compiled it, and what I attempted to do was really simplify what I saw as the predominant themes in there. Now, you're welcome to make additions to these, but what I saw as the common theme were the top three issues were, first and foremost, to review existing codes and rules affecting tree management. Second, to improve coordination and working relationships with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee and other advisory groups and staff regarding natural resources management and policies. And three, to improve communication and notice of development of actions affecting natural resources. So my suggested next steps are that we try to refine these top issues and make these priorities into goals and action items, and then work independently with staff on those items. And then we will report back at each meeting on how we're doing. So I welcome your thoughts about this.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was Pete, the thing I guess I'm trying to figure out
Mhm.
is I'm looking at the top three, and there's kind of a heavy emphasis kind of like on process.
Amen.
And some of that, needs to take place. There's no problem, but in thinking of kind of like the expertise of the members here, and thinking about like spending an entire year trying to figure out of keeping up to date on the city's actions and things. It seems like there can be two tracks. One track can be trying to improve the process or the connections or way we communicate and do things, but it'd be hard to see delegating that out and having each of us work on some aspect of that each month, and then coming, it'd be. I'm trying. Too many cooks at the table or in the kitchen doing that. What I'm wondering is, it seems like with the kind of things we just got done with this presentation and all the time we spend on the trees, it seems if you have two tracks, one track is kind of process and organizational development, but another one's kind of like the meat and potatoes things coming up, because I just have a hard time seeing us all meeting every month and everybody reporting on their aspect of improving this particular process.
Yeah, I mean, one example for how this is done is the Historic Review Board has a weekly or monthly, a yearly work plan, and then they kind of review it at each meeting. And and they kind of say how we doing on those. And some of their goals are fairly general, but others are more specific. So if for example, if staff brings a particular tree code section to you for review, and then we would explain that code section and how it works today, and then seek feedback on that. That's a very specific work item. Similarly,
but in that sense, the committee members are kind of passive, waiting for the staff to bring something for them to review. In a response kind of sense, where it seems like some of us are engaged or involved with things like what's going on at Clackamas Park and stuff like that. People are kind of taking a more proactive approach as opposed to waiting to hear to respond back.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys have individual projects that you are working on, I think it may be helpful for you to form consensus around projects, and then decide to knock those off the list in any particular year, and by just choosing particular ones that you want to all work on, I think it's a lot easier to get them done. So the ones that staff brings are obviously policy oriented and those kinds of things, and then you have your on the ground project stuff, which we've talked about some ideas on that. So yeah, I think we've maybe opened up a very open-ended thing here, but I want to be sure that we're being transparent about what our priorities are.
I'd like to present the other side of that, though. I think the three issues you put here are exactly what we need to be working on, and I think process is where we need to start. 'Cause I've tried to jot down our list of accomplishments over the past 2 years, and I think our shortcoming is that we don't have a process. It's a little cumbersome and vague, and I think we, not to start from square one, but I think we need to have some basic definition of a lot of the questions that continually come up in terms of transfer of information between our group and other groups in the city, and some really foundational questions that we haven't answered yet. And I don't think it's that complex to put together a simple communication plan, and I'd be more than happy to put together a rough draft of it. And I think it really starts by just looking at the other groups, PRAC and the historic Pres group, and find out how are they processing information, communicating with each other, with the city, and start with that. And then if we dedicate a small amount of time to each meeting, we can work through this thing really simply. And then once we have the process in place, I think we can accomplish a lot more. And if anything, that's my major frustration, is that we don't seem to be, we have a lot of great ideas, but I don't see any of them being followed through on. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Well, in response to what you just said, first question I would have you, Eric, is are you talking about item 2, primarily a focus on that and writing a draft out, or are you looking at 2 and 3 somehow being combined together because they're very similar?
Yeah, I think 2 and 3 are very closely related. Okay. So I would look to tackle those two and put together just a really basic draft of something.
Well, and then regarding accomplishments and what we have and haven't done, I will tell you, my belief is when issues come to our attention, not formally, but we become aware of something that's pending, and we haven't been consulted as a body, and we probably should be, then that's when we've stepped in and tried to ask for clarification. And I can think of also already progress that's occurred in the careful removal of trees versus seemingly somewhat intensive removal. All right, and then on Friday we have a chance to interact with something that I'm not trying to stop it. I just like to know why they're doing it and what can we do to make a complete project once they're done removing trees. We are making impacts because we're asking questions. That's the point, I think, that we are having an impact. I know Richard and I have had a long interest in when is this group going to look at specific projects. The groups that he's been involved in and other advisory bodies I've been involved in, and in the history of this committee 9 years ago, as we looked occasionally at specific projects. And we should have that. The thing about number 3, if you change the language to review specific projects and development actions, that would probably put us in the flow of looking at things that somebody thinks that we should look at. Whoever that is, I don't know. But 2 and 3 look very similar to me. They look like process. And I go along with what you're saying. But I also believe we had an impact because we're asking questions and people are responding. Not because we're mean-spirited, because we're
Jerry,
asking questions.
is your mic on? Sorry.
Is it on? I don't know.
Is your red light on? Yeah.
Oh, yes, I was talking into his.
There's some disagreement over who belongs to what mic here. I think.
Good, then it's not on the record what I said.
So yeah, I mean,
as usual, Jerry was talking out of the other side of his mouth.
But getting back to your point on that, yeah,
Okay.
I think
Richard?
that's part of our staff reports would be a regular overview of land use actions because your bylaws are incredibly broad. And your scope of activities in your bylaws is incredibly broad. It's hard to, but one of them states that you have you are to comment on land use actions that have the potential to significantly affect natural resources. And so what staff attempts to do is distinguish land use actions that that are not affecting natural resources, which are, identified and adopted natural resources, and other ones, but because we have the land use process which defines review and who the decision makers are. But then, so we'll start to do that tonight. I've got an overview of land use actions briefly that I'll go into in the staff report section. But we'd actually, if it's not in a natural resource overlay district, we typically have not brought that before you because our decision-making process is embodied by state law and it defines who gets notice, who comments, and who defines and what public notice is. So, and those are public records that are readily available to anybody to see. Yeah.
So my question, I guess, to you, Pete, would be regarding 3 here and this committee, this body.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like 3 and 2 are a little bit related, but if we change the language of 3 to be review specific projects, processes, and development actions affecting natural resource issues, that's what you were saying, that you forward that stuff to us. That really covers a huge area of interest.
Yeah.
And, my concern was that I didn't see reflected in I ranked everything 1 through 10.
I saw
I gave it to you.
You did.
And I only
the very night.
I only see 1 or 2 other people that did rank anything here. But
well, mine were suggestions. I certainly.
But for instance, my concern, and not just mine, Dr. DeHart, and also I think Richard's about natural function and functioning landscapes. That could be handled easily under item 3. I mean, if we made an adjustment in that language.
Mm-hmm. I'd want to look at one for a second because I understood there was some effort to try to get a joint meeting with PRAC, and it seems like there's more motivation to have joint meetings, do things so we have specific issues to address, and certain things come up that are time-sensitive nature, and maybe that's what we have to work if we want to work joint meetings or get some consultations. We have to figure out what are those issues or topics or challenges that require that kind of cooperation or coordination, and approach it from kind of like a needs basis.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bob. I mean, I've expressed it both ways to Scott Archer, that on the one hand, we need to meet at least once a year per our bylaws and coordinate policies with PrAC, and then and just as importantly, to talk about specific projects that have mutual interest in both committees, because Scott's general response to me when I broach that subject is, well, what is the specific item of interest? So you're exactly right. So I think it helps to be as specific as possible. Yeah. Yeah. But Scott will be visiting with us on Friday as well, so we'll have all the park staff out at the EOT at 9 o'clock on Friday.
By the way, thank you for doing that. I think it's good to do.
Yeah,
this.
I think it's great. I think
Yeah.
we'll be able to not only talk about the EOT specifically, but some of these very concerns
Sure.
that we have. Yeah. Mm. So,
I would just like to submit the idea of changing the language in number 3 to be review specific projects and practices and projects and practices relating to development actions,
how do people feel about that?
something of that effect.
I'm going
I'd
to
like-
go ahead and speak, I think, if you're
Yeah,
not
go
going to
ahead.
ask me to speak, since I'm
Go ahead.
supposed to be speaking.
Oh.
You forgot.
Yeah, I'm not used to using that.
I'm not sure those are the top 3, and they all seem like they're the same to me, or could be considered under one goal, or one item under a work plan, and these could be subheadings almost. And it seems like there should be other things there, and I kind of was under the impression we were going to get back, maybe the matrix or information, and then discuss how we were going to rank things.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll work
Well,
on
I
it
don't
first.
see that, though. I see that you've ranked the 3 based on what we all prepared and submitted.
Well, actually, I'm asking for refinement of what I attempted to do was
Well, what are
provide
other
a summary.
issues that were on the list, however?
All right, well, let's go through them. The 10 that staff suggested were climate change, global warming, carbon emissions
Do
reduction.
we have a list here somewhere? On the,
On the first,
This
yeah.
chart.
Suggestions?
Isn't it this?
The first page of the
Staff
work
report?
plan results compiled document.
That was part of the packet that went out, the email with attachments.
Yeah, it's on your screen.
This was from the last meeting.
Well, Pete sent that out, I think, with the agenda for this meeting.
Do you have this?
Yeah.
This is the matrix.
Right, but this is, Pete, is there a chance maybe we get a few more copies of that?
This one.
What is that?
That's what you sent out as an attachment.
Here. That.
That.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
this one. Yeah, that's the same as this, actually.
Yes.
That is the same as this, so.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, okay.
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 So that's the matrix.
Right.
Pardon me?
And and so you'll see on the top half of the page are the ones that I initially suggested, and then I got some additional written suggestions from you, and I wrote those in on the bottom half of the page. So those are starred
Storage.
rather than numbered. But where there was so much similarity between one of the written suggestions and one that I already suggested, I put a rank by it. For example, communications plan, which is what Eric suggested, I gave that a rank because he actually put a number by it. And then Doug DeHart wrote in his, and his top 3 were conduct the tree code review, pursue joint meetings with other advisory groups to achieve greater consistency, and 3, discuss more effective means of making the keeping the NRC informed of pending city actions and seeking your input where appropriate. Those were Doug's top 3.
Okay.
So they're very similar to what we talked about.
Yep.
Then Shaw had a general comment that they want to review city ordinances to see if updates are appropriate and make recommendations regarding revisions to those. And then, Richard, you had wrote in land development plans, regular review and monthly updates, a volunteer coordination plan based on input from Jerry and Bob, I think. Continued input on the South End concept plan, and coordination with PRAC, and reviewing the Parks and Recreation master plan, and Clackamas Cove, and developing a plan to address erosion issues in the Clackamas Cove. So those were the ones that were written in. Jerry ranked some of his top three, but his suggestion was to a plan for improvement of habitat and municipal habitats. So that kind of affects not only public works maintained areas, but also areas that are maintained by the Parks Department. And so we've received some feedback on that already from John Lewis, and we're starting to make inroads with the Parks Department in that regard.
By the way, I left him a message. I didn't speak with him directly, but stating that, part of his paragraph at the end was basically, if the people have great ideas, then they better figure out a way to help me do this stuff. And I basically left him a message saying, we're not trying to make things more difficult. And it isn't just your area. It's just in general the structure and function of habitat ought to be looked at more closely. And what's on my mind, I'll be honest with you, is a workshop with somebody from ODF&W.
Yeah.
Especially for the contractors. They do the work.
Well, I thought it was really good to see the maps that John had attached, and I wasn't aware that they actually had divided the city into zones as far as maintenance of the public works sites, and had landscape
300
bids.
sites.
Yeah, that's huge.
And over 50 water-related features, which mean active water features. I didn't know there was that many.
Neither did I.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
So this is great stuff. I mean, this is really what we're trying to
And how much,
get.
how much staff does he have to help them with that?
Well, they have seasonal staff and permanent staff, so they have stormwater crews. I don't know. I think it's 10 to 15 people in the summer, and then it drops down to a skeleton crew during other part of the year. But good question. And I think that's it. So yes, please do review the matrix and give us continued feedback on this. I'm not asking for an agreement.
I actually like the first three. If we'd have changed the number three to be more specific to looking at plans and things that might come before us, or practices that have to do with the natural environment interface.
Right.
But because they're so encompassing, I mean, Eric, you're concerned about process, and I agree with you. There's a black hole here. We're kind of relating to other departments, but only when we really ask.
Yeah, and I've got this section of the staff reports that number 6 on the agenda here, but I've got about 9 items to get to on that staff report thing because they've all come out of these conversations that we've had. Oh. So some of there'll be some feedback on this stuff, and when I get to that,
Well, I'll take a stab, if you would allow me, the group here, changing 3 to reflect an idea. And we're not going to adopt this tonight. Is that true? Or are we?
It's up to you. I mean, I'm not asking. I'm not.
Does the chair want to do?
I'm just asking for consideration.
I think we need to go through all this in detail. So probably next time around.
Right. Okay. And Eric had the idea of coming up with a plan for better coordination, communication, all that. I think it'd be really nice to look at that too.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a real good idea because we really need to, especially with PRAC, there's so much overlap because many of the parks are all about natural resources, and ideally we should be coordinating our efforts here.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, I agree there should be coordination of effort. You know, with respect to, I talked to Denise Kai, you know, and Scott, and I don't coordinate with the PrAC directly, they do. They have, I think with respect to parks maintenance, from what Denise told me, they have a fairly hands-off approach with respect to what staff does on a regular basis, but I think they're more geared towards, you know, operations and budgeting and those kinds of things, rather than the natural resource element, which is what our group is geared towards. So clearly there's room for overlap. And I've explained, you know, I've expressed that to Scott and Denise, and I think we'll be able to talk about that on Friday in some detail. Yeah.
And we're definitely not needing to get into the budgets and things like that, other than it affecting the practicality of things that we are talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
You know, it seems like if any of us have specific concerns, and I know some people do on this committee, about the way things are managed in terms of maintenance, then it seems like there should be a suggestion going from us to them indicating such, but then communication back, you know, kind of a back and forth communication on that.
Yeah, I agree.
And it just seems like there's so much synergy that could be the result of communicating with people rather than being in silos, you know.
Yeah.
And I think, in a certain extent, it seems like we're in a silo mentality, frankly.
They're hard to break down.
I know they are, and it's
yeah.
and I think we could accomplish a lot more.
Yeah.
And continuing with that for a second, that almost gets the reason I mentioned volunteer coordination and, you know, volunteerism and so forth is what Bob mentioned several months ago, and I really picked up on that, and I think that's a great area that can be explored in Oregon City somehow, but I'm not sure how that can happen unless you actually hire somebody to make it happen. And if you did have a person in such a capacity, then they could help break down the silos, basically.
Yeah.
I mean,
outside of the NRC, you know, a lot of cities have a public information person, and their job is to not only present, you know, how the city's spokesperson, as it were, but they also coordinate how these departments communicate between one another and other groups as well. So we don't have the benefit of that yet.
First person you see in Lake Oswego when you walk in Lake Oswego City Hall, half time. She's not there all the time.
Yeah.
So a woman who does just what you said, get to the right department. You have a complaint, she handles it first, so the departments don't get blasted. Tries to work it out with them, and it's a very good investment, wise investment, to keep staff being able to do their function and having somebody else interface.
Yeah, I mean, staff is always going to be answerable to the public when they call, and you know, I think all of our staff are fairly adept at fielding calls about just about anything from anybody, but sometimes it just takes experience, having been here for 7 years, to know, oh, well, that's a public works question, you need to talk to so-and-so, or that's code enforcement, you need to talk to Nancy Bush, whatever. That just takes experience, but yeah, a good coordinator will know that. Yeah. Okay. So thank you. Look forward.
Okay, so we'll take that up next time around.
Well, let me ask one more question
Go
on
ahead.
item 1. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, that's
forgot
fine.
it. Review existing codes and rules affecting tree management. Is that more like natural resource management rather than just tree management, or?
Well, we've got different sections of code for different locations. We have the Natural Resources Code, which is specific to that overlay. And then we have the Public Tree Code, which is any public right-of-way or city park or publicly owned land. So that's a set outside of that. And they both have mitigation requirements that are slightly different. So it's important to understand how those codes function in order to suggest improvements to them. And then the development review code has a tree protection section which only applies during development review, which is the bone of contention for a lot of people because it doesn't regulate trees on private property outside of a land use process, meaning it's not a Lake Oswego code where you have every tree regulated, but you're allowed to remove 3 per year without a permit. I think, I don't know if that's currently the situation, but that's the way the Portland code is going to work if it's adopted, and the Lake Oswego code currently functions. And that requires staff and enforcement in order to have that kind of code. And you also have to charge fees for review of permits. And we currently neither regulate trees on private property, residential property I'm talking about, or charge a permit for review of such an action. So it's ramping up your tree protection code to a whole new level of regulation. Yeah, which it gets into property rights. And sometimes, you get these private issues where somebody is caring for their house and yard but may not know enough about it, so there's a public education component. They are responsible for hiring an arborist in certain cases, and if they're going to get a permit to remove a tree and those kinds of things. So it gets into a whole element of expense for a private property owner if you decide as a city you're going to do that. And that's just, in addition to the trees you're already regulating in the public right-of-way. So what your Oregon Department of Forestry recommends is that you have a good public tree ordinance, and they don't recommend getting into private tree regulation unless you're absolutely sure you got the political will and the resources and staff and money to do it. And then the other thing I should mention is we're talking regulation. There's a whole other side to this, which is incentive, being the carrot rather than the stick. And the Friends of Trees program is a perfect example of a carrot type program where you're both educating people about the benefit of trees and providing discounts on purchase of trees in order to get them planted. And they have volunteers who come and do it for you, if you're willing. So they're choosing and targeting willing participants as opposed to regulating unwilling participants. So I think it's very important to have that conversation out in the open before you go there. At the same time, these are the ways that our codes currently function. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can move on to the Heritage Tree Code amendments.
See what I wrote.
There's two different sets of staff reports.
I beg your pardon?
I'm just looking at the way the agenda looks on the screen. It says staff reports after revision to work plan. Then I'm just, trying to follow the order.
So,
You notice some of them are indented a little bit.
Oh, okay.
yeah, so 4A is the title.
Okay, this staff report.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
and
just tracking.
this is the cover report, and so when you hit documents and then
okay.
and you view it, that's a summary of what I'm talking about.
Sure.
And then to get back to the actual code, you do this.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Oh wait, no, I pressed the wrong one. So, yeah, you actually have to select that and hit view.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, okay.
So we're looking at the amendments now?
Right. So
The clean one or the draft?
we're looking at the clean one. The way this computer program works, it won't accept red line drafts. I can't readily convert them into PDFs, but I do have those available if you would like to see them. I got them in Word format.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not asking you to approve this tonight. I wanted to explain what the revisions are in this clean code version. It's easier to read since it's clean, but I do have all of the
Yeah, I think it would be
revisions.
helpful to be
Yeah.
able to see the actual proposed code.
Yeah. So the clean code version here is what is proposed with all of the latest revisions. And then I'll explain what they were.
You were asking for a red line, is that?
Well,
Yeah.
just the current,
The current red line version, the
Yeah.
track changes version.
yeah,
Yeah, so I got those in Word format, but I can't view them on the screen.
okay.
Yeah. So what I'll go through basically is what we did. We made changes to the previous draft in response to edits suggested by the public with NRC's concurrence, and those revisions include a completeness review process and timeline, a clarification of the nomination process for trees on public property which is not under city jurisdictions, and that's the most recent change, and is under review right now by the city attorney. So until I get comments back from the city attorney on all of these revisions, I'm not going to be, bringing it back for a recommendation for approval. And you would be able to see what the city attorney's comments are as well. And finally, we just improved the formatting to make it easier to read. So if you go to the actual code and take a look at it, under Section B on page 1 of 6, we have nomination, which states that any person can nominate a tree or stand of trees. It says all nominations will be forwarded to the City Commission with a prior review and recommendation from the Natural Resources Committee. In the absence of a functioning Natural Resources Committee, then the Community Development Director shall forward the nomination directly to the City Commission. And then we have a series of subsections that talk about the difference between a nomination on private property, which requires owner consent, and then public property with these distinctions between different types of public property. First is city-owned property that is not public, not city right-of-way. So that would be a park or other city-owned property. And that would go to the NRC for a recommendation once it's been deemed complete. Then you've got city public right-of-way trees that are nominated, same process, but in that case we would also notify the abutting property owner because they are going to be responsible for that tree. Then we have other public rights of ways and public properties that are not city-owned, county, state, federal. So Clackamas County, Oregon Department of Transportation, and others. And in this case, I'm simply saying that the written consent of that jurisdiction shall be required in order to deem that application complete. That was the provision that I wrote in, barring any other suggestion. So I'm open to suggestion on that. And then that agency would be notified of the nomination immediately upon receipt of it by the city. So those are some of the distinctions that we've made in the latest draft. We have a nomination submittal requirements that require that if it's either a tree or a stand of trees, that the Community Development Director can request sufficient information to make a determination to support the nomination and ask for further information if needed to show whether that tree nomination meets the criteria in Section D. And then the review process, which includes the completeness review by staff, which is a 30-day process. Then the Natural Resources Committee review and recommendation within 30 days of completeness. And then finally, a City Commission decision within 30 days of the NRC meeting. So that works out to about 120 days, which is the same as we would treat a land use application, even though this is not a land use process. And then following approval by the City Commission, we talk about the requirement for execution of a restrictive covenant that runs with the land to be signed and recorded. And that covenant is a legal document which permanently protects a tree and then provides for mechanisms to notify the city if the tree is either diseased or hazardous, and those kinds of things, and needs to be reviewed if it's going to be removed.
Could I ask you a question?
Surely.
Okay. Under one, completeness review by staff.
Yep.
It seems like, if I'm reading this correctly, I guess it's pretty straightforward. A written statement indicating whether the application is complete enough to process, and if not, what information must be submitted to make the application complete for review by the Natural Resources Committee. Well, are we going to see this to make comments, to suggest information we might need to make it complete? So
I think that would
review
slow
it?
the process down. You know, this is a typical completeness review process for that staff would do based on application requirements and criteria. So if it was a land use process, if they haven't responded verbally to the applicable criteria, we will not deem the application complete. And we will ask them, say, please respond to criteria D, you know, which we look at section D and we say, please respond to these. And when they get those responses back, we're like, good, you're complete, and we send it on to the NRC. Now you get to see those responses and determine if they're adequate and to justify the nomination. But I think if we bring every application before you to deem complete, they may have to wait, you know, a significant amount of time to do that, because then we have to kind of, it could add another 30 days to the process.
I could see where it would actually speed up the process, because you deem it complete, it comes to us, we have more questions, it goes back, you know, and so forth, back and forth. And I could see where it could be quicker, frankly. But maybe the word there is, kind of bothers me, complete a little bit also. It must be submitted to make the application maybe sufficient for review. It may not be complete. It's not a complete application, I guess, or it could be, I suppose.
The way the city attorney once explained land use completeness to me, I was like, how detailed are we going to get? He said, completeness review is the city's decision to review the application and start the process.
Okay.
And it may not be a good response, and in actuality, the applicants can say, I don't care how good you think my response is, deem it complete. You are the decision maker. I'm telling you, give me a decision. And by state law, if it's a land use application under those circumstances, which are rare, the city is bound by our own code to deem the application complete. So if they have responded, we're not really reviewing the content of that response for adequacy. We're really just seeing that it's a response. We're not evaluating its rightness or wrongness. We're asking for a response. And that's really a non-discretionary decision.
I could see where a concurrent review by NRC could speed up the process.
So you're deciding to deem it complete and make a decision on it on the same night?
No, I'm just saying that it's been submitted, you're reviewing it in-house. I could see where the NRC could also be reviewing it to see if there are additional questions that they might have. And then provide those questions to you, and the director could then include those as feasible or appropriate in his response to the applicant.
I think you have to meet in order to do that,
Why?
because it's a consensus decision.
Wouldn't
and
be
you're a public
consensus.
body.
No, these are just questions, individual questions
Oh,
coming
well,
back from us.
What
Consider
does the
that.
rest of the group think?
I guess I had kind of a related question. If it's deemed complete by staff and then sent to review to NRC, but we don't think that we have enough information to make a decision, can we send it back, or do we have to make a decision on it once it's deemed complete by staff?
Mhm.
Is there
You
any
gotta have a rubber
revision
stamp.
or review, continued review at that point?
Well, if you want to be the completeness reviewer, I can shorten this section completely down. And we wouldn't have to worry about your question at all. We'll just send it to the NRC for a completeness review. And you make the determination, not staff.
I've got a question. If that came to this committee and we didn't have a quorum that night or whatever, could it be extended I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of this.
I mean, the idea is that you've got a set of application requirements, and in this case, it's it's whatever's on the sheet that we give the applicant, which is a form. So I could see individual, under nomination submittal requirements, we've got individual trees may be submitted by nomination on a form provided by the Community Development Director and attaching the required information. Now, we don't go into a great deal of detail in this code about what's required, but if you guys want to put together a list of submittal items, which is basically just a list, then now, that's one way to do it. And that's the way you would do it in a land use application process. And you can give that to a technician, and they say, you have A, B, C, and D, thanks, it's good to go. But yeah, I could see where you could reject it. But but it has to be based on some list that you have. And the idea is that we do some of the heavy lifting. We're not disqualifying an application from review. We're just kind of making sure it's complete.
Is there a way, once the application is received and you start your completeness review, at that point can you email it to us for comments, and then
Sure.
open up a window where we can just comment, not at the official meeting, but through email.
Mhm.
And at that point, then you can pass along those questions, and then I guess sign off as complete.
Mhm. There's a way to do that, but my only fear is that you get into judging the application before you've actually reviewed it as a body. Like if it was a planning commission, that's called ex parte contact. And I know this isn't a land use issue, but
I guess my concern
I think
would be
it's a fairness issue with respect to the application.
I don't think that's what you're saying. He's saying, though. I think he's asking if we can submit comments to the application, to the review of the application, as you're reviewing it. Our additional thoughts, not as a group, not as a body, but as individuals on the Natural Resource Committee.
I think,
In other words, you're reviewing an application
yeah.
and you're getting, if possible, any additional comments from the Natural Resource Committee as individuals.
He just comments on the adequacy of the application.
Yeah, do you have any comments? No? Yes? Have you thought about, et cetera, et cetera? It's not a deliberative process as a body.
But I've got a concern. Let's say you go ahead and you forward some questions, okay? And the follow-up on those questions seem to be inadequate or off the mark. What happens then? It's kind of like the person asking the question is hoping that somehow whatever their concerns are get addressed. And so it seems like, it's like, where does it stop, I guess I'm asking.
Yeah, that's my concern, is where does it stop?
Well, it seems to me
Yeah.
you would get the questions, and somebody would make a determination on whether or not the questions were appropriate. If not, they don't get answered.
I'll ask the city attorney. I want to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, I didn't expect to actually include in a completeness review process until the gentleman from the public brought it up as a way to expedite the review process. And I think that was the intent of having it in there in the first place. And it also came out of the desire not to have to review an incomplete application. So I guess we need to look a little harder at this section and come up with an alternative that suits everybody.
I'm starting to take a different tact, is that we've got staff looking at the completeness, we've got each member of this group looking at the completeness. It's getting more complex, not simpler.
It's getting longer and longer.
And it seems to me that the simple fact of completeness should be fairly easily judged. And I don't know if everybody has to get in on that particular part of the game. But as long as the thing is complete enough to go forward with, I think staff could decide that rather than having to also wade through comments from potentially 7 of us.
And I would add that there's nothing really that stops any member of the NRC from requesting more information when it comes to the time of the review. I mean, I think that happens a lot. It's happened with heritage tree nominations as well. So we thought we were bringing a complete application, and then it turns out we wanted more information when we looked at it. So, yeah.
So that is an option. Once it's signed off by staff as complete, we can still request more information.
Well, yeah. I mean, you may table your decision until a subsequent meeting. And it doesn't change that. Once you've made your decision, then within 30 days of that, we got to send it to the city commission. But, I think the land use process guarantees a 120-day decision, so it's kind of following that, which is 4 months. So, yeah. But my concern is exactly that the completeness review is pretty straightforward. It should be done by staff, and would notify you of it, but I don't know if you need to be involved in the detailed review of what's been submitted in order to make that review adequate.
Yeah, basically what we need is a complete application that has the necessary information and base our decision on that.
And it could be, like I said, the form that we currently have is a pretty limited form. It's got 3 lines on it, and it says, please explain. It used to say, please explain how your application meets the qualifications for heritage trees. But now we've got 2 subsections. We got the site criteria, and we've got the heritage criteria. So we've got criteria 1 through 3 for the site that all need to be met, and the heritage criteria 1 through 4, one of which needs to be met. And those are going to be on the application form, and the applicant's going to need to respond to those. So I think that helps provide the clarity that we're looking for.
Seems if the criteria are on the application form, then that should be sufficient for the completeness review.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. Just trying to make it simpler and quicker.
Page 5 of 9, I have a question on.
Okay.
The red.
5 of 9? or 5 of 6?
Page 509, it says on the bottom here.
Okay.
Of mine. It's a criteria. Heritage criteria, at least one criteria, I through 4, must be met. Can you explain what 4 is there?
Oh, I think you're looking at an older version. 4 was the criteria that staff had put in at suggestion of the Planning Commission when we did the work session, that if there is a pending land use application on the property on which the tree is nominated, then it would not be eligible. And so we had a meeting, and some of the members on the committee weren't at that meeting, but we decided to remove that criterion, Jerry. So the idea had been to try to, not complicate heritage tree nomination as a way to, interfere with land use approval processes, and just keep it clean that way. But the issue came up, well, what if you have a willing landowner who's got land use approval or is under land use approval, who is amenable to the idea of heritage tree designation while the application is under review? Why should he be disqualified from that? So that was one way of looking at it. So we're back to the original 3, because 4 had been put in there by staff following that work session in October.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we've been working on this for a while.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are the next steps? for
Oh,
this,
sorry.
picking it up?
Next step is to get feedbacks from the city attorney, and at the next meeting, I think we would look for a recommendation for approval from the NRC on this, if people are feeling comfortable with what we've outlined here. And concrete next step will be, to send you the original red lines when you make that decision, or prior to it. I've got all the original red lines from the day we started editing this, and that would be part of your final recommendation packet in August. And then after that, it goes to the Planning Commission and to the City Commission. The question I don't know is, since this is potentially something that affects allowable use of land, is there a legal requirement for the city to provide a Measure 56 notice under state law, which is a notice that goes to every property owner in the city that says the city is about to pass a regulatory action that may affect the value of your property? And that's whenever you do something with zoning, whether you open up your zoning code and it changes the zoning code, then you have to send that notice out. And it's usually associated with a mailing, which there's a cost incurred to the city for mailing the labels out. So we also have to clarify whether Measure 56 notice is required. The other way that we do it is we bundle this in with the legislative code amendments that are going to be coming up as part of the South End concept plan, and that way we would have had to pay that fee and do that Measure 56 notice anyway, and this would be part of those amendments coming up at the end of the year.
Pete,
Yeah.
on that notification of the property owners,
Yeah.
if an individual had property with no trees on it, they would still get the same notice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's one of the ballot initiatives that was submitted because of concerns about overregulation of land, and so it's been on state law for some time, and all municipalities have to do it.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to think, if you didn't have trees on your property,
Yeah.
it'd be difficult to see how that would apply apply or
Yeah,
affect your
but-
property value.
But they could
Right.
plant a tree and it could turn into a heritage tree in 100 years. And,
Yeah.
You know, so
The
it
no-
will.
The notice doesn't say it's going to reduce your property value or increase your property value, just as it may affect your property value.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
or
this,
the use of land.
and this
So-
one's an odd one as far as that because it's voluntary and, you know,
Yeah.
there's no way that anyone's going to be forced to,
Yeah.
you know, accept whatever change there would be.
The land use is the same way. You know,
Yeah.
a land use owner signs the land use application, so that, in a sense, is their consent.
Mhm.
Yeah. So but it's the same. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question on, excuse me, section F, page 5 of 6. It suggests that the heritage tree plaque is not required, or is one required, but it kind of says the plaque shall be posted. You know, I'm trying to figure out if you have to have the plaque or not.
Well, I think we're always going to have a plaque. The question, we did for the last two, we presented those. And,
Well, I guess, is it
yeah.
required, or is it optional, or what, for a landowner? And I think that sentence, the city may charge a fee, I assume that's to the landowner?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Shall be, maybe. Shall be. Okay. Well, may is permissive and shall is mandatory, so.
yeah,
Um,
that's why I'm wondering, you know, which is it?
Yeah. Well, I think if we want the city to furnish the plaque and the property owner to display the plaque, it should be a shall. And then the question of who charges, the city may. You know, I know Clackamas County does charge a small fee to cover the cost of that.
Yeah, so far they haven't been charging. Is that not correct?
No, we haven't been charging.
Okay.
Yeah, we've just paid for it out of the community development budget. So.
Yeah, so that
Yeah.
could be left May, just in case
Yeah.
they get super expensive sometime. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, two a year, you know, it's a small fee, and the plaque shall be posted at a location, if feasible, visible from the public right of way. I think if we furnish a plaque, then
yeah, well,
It
you're
should
saying
be,
that the plaque
yeah.
shall be posted, but you're saying it may be furnished. So I think we need to.
I think we need to say shall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other part is the city is supposed to keep a record of all heritage trees, but I think what we actually do is we put them on the website and we also provide a certificate. So some of these things we don't necessarily need to have in the code, but we would do anyway as a matter of policy.
Yeah.
And the city also covers the cost of recordation of the covenant as well for the owner.
Now, the city charging a fee for the plaque, that assumes that it's not on private property.
Well, I think that's
Or is
that's if it's on private property. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, since this is, in a sense, an honoring of the tree involved, that some sort of notification is just,
Yeah.
should be part of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the plaque is it's a movable plaque. They can put it out at, you know, take it in at night if they're worried about people stealing it and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
May need to add, providing the plaque to a private property owner or something. I mean, that just, it's a little ambiguous the way it's, I think the whole paragraph's a little ambiguous
Okay.
and contradictory in a sense.
I've never run into a code that did that before.
Yeah, of course not. First time, right?
Good points, Rick. Thanks you. I'll make those changes. And if you have any other
Well, it
comments
says
on that.
to the property owner, or if the tree is in a public right-of-way, so it does say that.
If the tree is appropriate.
Right there in F1.
Official. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Okay, so if it's on public property and it gets designated, that's pretty straightforward. The city shall be bound to put a plaque down. And then if it's on private property, we may charge a fee, but there shall be a plaque furnished and it shall be posted. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's potentially part of heritage tours and stuff like that. So
Right.
knowing for sure which tree it is really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay. So pending comments of the city attorney and the revisions that you suggested here, it looks like we're getting pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see a vote at the next meeting if that's possible. Get everybody a copy of the red line edition and a final copy. I think would be the best.
Okay.
Then,
Great. Thanks.
okay. So,
There's member reports.
yep.
I have a question for Pete, I guess. The October 5th Heritage Tree Tour, thus far proposed, do we have a commitment to use that vehicle? Otherwise, I've got a bid from a bus company.
I haven't seen a firm commitment, no. You mean the Eco Bus or?
Well,
the,
I didn't talk to EcoBus. You
yeah.
were talking to EcoBus.
Right. I got a nod from Tony that we could spend up to $400 on a tour
Okay.
bus.
That was the number I ran
Yeah,
by
yeah,
a company up in
yeah.
Vancouver.
But we have to be careful that it's an NRC-sponsored trip.
Right. Absolutely.
And advertise it as such.
Okay, and I wondered if anybody else wanted to help me with this thing. I have a thought. We did something like this 8 years ago. Oregon City Cleanup and Enhancement did a fall foliage tour and looked at significant trees, but I think we need to have, I'll be honest with you, since we're entering into the other issue of some of the landscape maintenance things, kind of have John along to talk about what he does, and Lewis, maybe. I'm
Okay.
just asking for some help. Anybody that would
Yeah.
like to help me, I'd be willing to,
Yeah.
more than happy to involve you.
Yeah, that'd be good.
We have to produce a time script, and flow, so we keep it under 4 hours.
Yeah, select some sites and
Yep.
4 hours. I'll be happy to work with you on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Only thing I have to report is in the waning days of the state legislature, they did pass a carbon tax study bill. And the whole point would be to kind of examine potential impacts and benefits of imposing a carbon tax on goods and services in Oregon. Carbon tax has been adopted by a province of British Columbia and actually seems to be reducing carbon emissions and producing economic benefits at the same time.
So they're actually seeing an effect from that?
Yeah, they've actually measured reductions in emissions up in British Columbia after adoption of their tax.
Wow.
And how are they producing an economic benefit?
Well, because if you're adopting cleaner technologies and processes, somebody has to put solar panels up, somebody has to do all the different things they're doing to produce it.
Okay. It's not just the value of the tax that's being
No.
assessed. Okay.
That's good to know.
Can you get a hold of that information? That sounds very interesting.
I just remember, can you Google it on the internet?
Oh, well, if you could share that with us, for those of us that need help.
Okay.
That would be
Okay,
good.
I've got a little announcement for the Clackamas River Basin Council. We're having a fundraiser at Wichita Bar and Grill on the 25th of August, where if you have one of these little handouts and show up between 5 and 9, half the price of your meal gets donated to the Basin Council.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Deal.
so it's a good excuse to go out to dinner, have a beer or two, and probably meet a lot of other people, because it looks like it's going to be pretty well attended.
Good deal.
August,
And I've got the little gizmos if anybody wants them.
what's the date on that again?
The
So Wichita.
25th of August,
25th of August.
5 to 9.
This is the one up here by Fred Meyer?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's got the address right on it.
There's a couple of those around.
We could probably provide a
I'm going
link.
to have to get a scissors here.
We could provide a link to that on the city Facebook site? Or,
Yeah, it's
okay.
there's a link to this page with all the little
Okay.
sheets you can print out for yourself on the clackamasriver.org site.
Okay.
And if I can grab a,
If you could remind me of that tomorrow, that'd be great.
okay,
So I'll do it.
yeah, I'll,
Yeah.
so,
Been up to.
Oh, is that it for you?
yeah, that's it for me.
Thanks.
I went on a tour of Shaw's property last Saturday with a group
Oh.
of people, which was pretty impressive. I had not been out there before, and so got a kind of an explanation of what it looked like at one time and what activities were occurring out there, and how she has changed things around and continues to work on the forest part of it also. It was very good.
What's it like out there?
It's a forest. But part of it used to be a pig farm by
Yeah,
her
okay.
family
Yeah.
many years ago, and she's restoring that. And also on the forest side, there was a huge slide over there a few years ago, and she's working on taking care of the various invasive species. And it's a difficult task, as you might guess.
Yeah.
But it's an impressive piece of property, and she's doing some good things out there.
Yeah, good to know. I haven't been there.
Yeah.
Eric, you have anything?
How many were on your tour?
Doug Neely, myself, of course Shaw, Doug DeHart, Gail from the city. She's in the stormwater area, is that right? Pete?
What's that?
Gail? Gail? from the-
Gail Johnson
I think
from
so.
Stormwater?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
yes.
Yeah, she's our water quality
And
tech.
a couple of other folks that don't hit me right now.
Good deal.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Excellent.
So did anybody else want a copy of that right away? A little, got one for Pete here.
Cup.
Eric,
Give
you-
you one of the little handouts right there.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have some reports. I'll try to be brief. So our End of the Oregon Trail field trip is scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. We meet out there at the EOT. Doug and I believe Bob won't be able to make it, but I think we'll have pretty good turnout. Scott and Denise and Larry Potter will all be there. We did get an email from John Lewis, and I forwarded that to you with respect to public works responsibilities and landscaping and maintenance and those sorts of things. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but he asked me to share his comments with you, so I recommend you take a look at it and digest it and give it some thought for future discussion as we start to talk about better coordination of departmental policy. Give you an update on the Dunes Drive 99E project. David Evans and Associates is the consultant that's working on the project. They're engineering and planning firm, and they have a wetland and landscaper as well working on that project. They're about at 60% design level, so that's where they're about ready to, develop some pretty concrete plans.
Which project is this?
This is the McLaughlin Phase 2 improvement project.
okay.
It's all within the existing right-of-way, and it involves some pedestrian and bike lane improvements and those sorts of things. Portions of the project fall within the Natural Resources Overlay District, but there's no significant expansion of the footprint of the project because it's mostly using the existing footings, and it's considered to be what's called an exempt project because it's an existing roadway. That being said, they're analyzing their impacts very closely and looking at the Natural Resource Overlay District standards. They're not doing any tree removal within the Natural Resources Overlay District, according to Alex Dupuy in communications I had with him today.
Can you explain how far that heads up Dunes Drive?
Not without a graphic.
Okay.
The extent of the project goes from the bridge down to the intersection of Dunes, so on both sides, and down the Firestone Alley. There a little bit. There's some
Brian
sewer.
and I, you're
Yeah.
aware of this, met with
Yeah.
Bob Marshall, the landscape architect,
Yeah.
to try to talk to him about retaining the
Yeah.
evergreen trees around River Shore Hotel.
Yeah.
20-some spruces. Is that the direction they're going, or do you know?
The project impact that I was talking to Alex Dupuy about was the area closest to the Clackamas River where the Natural Resources Overlay District was.
Okay.
So they weren't looking at the river shore area on that map, but I'll forward you the map that
Sure.
they sent me today so you can see what we were talking about.
Yeah.
But they're planting, I think, 50 trees on that section where I looked at, in addition. So, South End Concept Plan. Our consultants are about 3 weeks away from producing a draft document and map based on almost a year's worth of public process now. We'll be bringing that. I'll be bringing that towards you as a formal agenda item when we get that document. The draft concept that we've got to date envisions room for between 2,200 and 2,800 new housing units in the South End UGB area over the next 30 years. Varying land use densities, but it's a complete community plan, and it has a lot of consideration given to open space and trails connections. 2 very small neighborhood scale commercial areas. It's not a development plan, it's a concept plan, so it's sort of a big picture view. At this point, ultimately, we will need to adopt comprehensive plan designations for it, and zoning code to implement it. So we've had excellent turnout at all of our meetings so far. Usually around 80 to 100 people showing up at these meetings, which is good. So we really tried to reach out and do a lot of thinking outside the box in terms of getting out to the community and getting input on that plan.
Pete, how is the community reacting to it? I remember this with Park Place Village very well.
Yeah.
And also the Beaver Creek concept plan.
I think there's people that are obviously don't want things to change out there, but there's also a majority, a fairly silent majority of people who support what the work's been done out there and understand that in the future things are going to change out in South End, and there needs to be new connections, new housing, a better range of diversity of land uses in that area to support a sustainable community, because gas isn't always going to be $4 a gallon. People clearly don't want to see big commercial and a lot of small lot development out there. We hear that loud and clear. So I think the plan provides a good balance that protects existing large lot development out there.
Mm-hmm.
And on the redevelopable areas, we're going to have some higher intensity housing and land uses, and then try to make it a more walkable community than it is today, with more sidewalks and opportunities to get around. And I think that gets a lot of support, but the difficulty is that type of improvement can only come with a certain level of development. You know, it's not free. And the development community builds the majority of it. Notwithstanding, we can leverage some funding to build trails and open space improvements with metro money. But this is a metro urban growth plan, you know, that the city adopts, and so ultimately we have to show compliance with Metro Title 11, which is planning for new urban areas, and it looks at not just housing, it looks at availability of school land, fire and emergency services, protection of natural resources, and a fully functional transportation system, which is
heard something about an alternative connection to 9090 heading west.
Right. So the projected volume for, if you were to build out that 400 acres of urban growth area, the projected volumes of traffic along South End Road essentially are going to double than what they are today. And the roadway itself would need to be a 3-lane section, which could carry that volume. The problem exists beyond the study area where the South End Road joins 99E, outside the study area. And capacity and safety improvements for those intersections there. And the transportation system plan update, which is done at the same time, has already identified improvements for those areas, and took into account the density associated with build out of the South End area. So there's been some dovetailing. The alternative road configuration idea was been proposed by a few people in the community. Does not take into account some pretty harsh realities in my mind. One are, it's outside of the city's jurisdiction. The road connection between South Butel Road or Forest Ridge Road and 99E is what people are talking about. That's metro open space habitat area, and bisecting it with a road would fragment that habitat. Metro staff, open space staff, and serious concerns about that.
So
they control the property.
Geologically unstable too?
Then you have the geologic hazard overlay district that would, you know, it's a known landslide area, all of it. And you're also talking about huge engineering cost. So you spend your limited transportation budget on improvements to an existing roadway, or do you build an entirely new roadway in an area such as that? In my mind, for the money that we got to put into this plan, we're not going to study that as feasible within our plan. It may be something that the county and the city work on at some other point in the future, but South End Road is not going to build out overnight. The annexation process is going to be piecemeal and slow to happen, and the development process would be too. And it's entirely going to be property owner driven and market driven. What the city can control is the planning.
So you don't see a large block of development interest coming in there seeking.
There are large parcels out there, and there are landowners who, you know, are looking to see what happens with the concept plan. I think they're kind of silent in the process right now. I think our community advisory team includes members of the business community on it, who do represent people out there who have development interests. And so there's some 20-acre sites, and then there are some smaller sites, 5 acres and 10 acres and those kinds of things. But in order to annex property, you do need to be contiguous to the city and also contiguous to city sewer, and it needs to be efficient to serve. So one of the things that we're going to get out of the plan is hopefully an estimate of phasing of development based on proximity and likelihood of sewer connections and those kinds of things. There are at least 3 county subdivisions from the 1970s that are on septic out there. And some of those septic fields are close to, their final working life.
They are failing.
Yeah, they are, yeah. And I approved what's called a land use compatibility statement for a septic replacement out there today because it's more than 300 feet from city sewer and there's no other way to put anything in there. So you're allowed to, within the UGB, the city has to sign off on those septic field replacements, but we do see those out there. Yeah. Okay. Sign code update. We kicked off a public involvement process to update the sign code. Laura Turway is the project manager for that. It's just started. We haven't formed a steering committee yet. We haven't started a website yet, but we will have a website up for the sign code update, which is www.ocsigncode.org. And NRC will be asked to provide a volunteer as a stakeholder on that process. So be ready for that. Planning Commission recommended approval of the street tree list at their last meeting based on your recommendation, and they had a couple of suggestions for how to improve it. And specifically, they wanted to put the native column over closer to the right side of the page and a few other things like that. But yeah, they were good suggestions. So we're going to incorporate some of their suggestions. They didn't recommend removal of any of the species or additions, so that's moving forward to the City Commission. Your recommendation for approval of the integrated pest management plan has been sent to the management. And we're waiting for feedback from various departments on that. I want to point out, Water Environmental Services and the City of Happy Valley, certain departments within Clackamas County are using that as a working document in compliance with their stormwater permit. So there's some overlap there, and we got good input from Wes. Gail Shalom, who's the specialist at environmental policy specialist at WES, has given us good feedback on the IPM, which I forwarded along to Public Works. So I'll give you an update on that and see where it goes. Good. There's an Oregon State University Urban Forestry Needs Assessment with funding from the Oregon Department of Forestry. It's a survey for Portland and Vancouver area. Abby Driscoll is a student who's doing the survey, and I've responded on that survey on behalf of the city and Public Works and Parks Department. We should be getting results back on that hopefully soon, and I'll keep you apprised of that. It should be a useful tool for us to determine what kind of urban forestry program we can afford and where some of our needs lie in relationship to other cities in the region as well. And with respect to an overview of land use applications, right now, here's what we have. As far as non-natural resource overlay district applications, we have a conditional use application under review for Portland Metro Men's Center. This is on Warner Parrott Road, associated with the church. We have a 3-lot partition on Hunter Avenue. We have the legislative process for the Transportation System Plan adoption, which is going before the City's Commission for adoption here fairly soon. We are reviewing a zone change. Our Planning Commission has recommended approval of a zone change from R10 to R6 with a 10-lot subdivision on Canyon Ridge Drive, and that will be going to the City Commission next week. And that's all we have for current land use applications that I'm aware of that are complete and under review. Fairly light. We also have a lot of pre-applications as well, but
I just
we-
want to commend you. This is really nice you did this. I don't know we've had this input before.
Right, you're right.
And this is
It's-
really.
It's easier for
we
staff to
appreciate
just
this.
go through this,
Yeah.
quickly. As
That's
far
what
as,
you did. The briefness of it was fine, you know.
yeah, okay. Good, yeah, well, I
Excellent.
hope to be doing this at each meeting. Natural Resource Overlay District application, I want to talk about this with you on Friday morning. We have a type 1 verification process in our Natural Resources Overlay District, which means given clear and objective standards and an independent review, an applicant for development can exempt their property from the Natural Resources Overlay District. And we've received an application from Royal Flush Plumbing, which is adjacent to the end of the Oregon Trail, to expand their existing office. And there's a old Title III stream area on our map behind their property,
Yep.
which is kind of a segment, and it's been disconnected from its historic stream basin, I think, for a long time because of the EOT piped, put the original stream in a pipe. And so they submitted a type 1 verification process that hasn't been approved yet. And that will be reviewed by David Evans and Associates, who's the city's peer reviewer for wetland and watershed verifications.
Good.
So we'll talk about that on Friday when we go out to the EOT. So that's a roundup of the land use that we have under review right now. I didn't talk about the bigger processes that you heard about today that Kelly presented. So Blue Heron site, obviously you're aware of, and the South End concept plan. But these are just the land use review ones that we've got. There's a lot of items that we deem incomplete that we won't tell you about yet. So yeah. So that's all I have on those.
Okay.
Thanks.
Appreciate that.
Got a question on the, do you want to recognize the mayor?
There's Mayor Neely.
Good to see the mayor.
We think we do. But bumblebees.
Oh, yeah.
I keep reading in the newspaper
Yeah.
about bumblebees, and I'm thinking about the integrated pest management plan.
Yeah.
Is there an impact here, or is there something
Well-
the city's considering that,
Yes.
in regard to bumblebees?
Well, related to the integrated pest management plan, but also John Lewis saw the situation in Hillsborough and Wilsonville and sent an email instructing the crews not to check and see if Safari was even on their radar and not to use it.
The name of Safari?
The pesticide that was applied on those trees that
Was the
killed those bees.
pesticide a pesticide or a herbicide?
It's an insecticide.
I think it's an
Well, I'm asking.
insecticide, and it
Herbicides
said
are
on the
invasive.
It's an
label.
insecticide applied to large trees because they were dripping honeydew. But it turns out that the pesticide is extremely toxic to bees,
Not to be used
and
on
the
flowering
trees were
plants.
just coming into bloom.
Yeah.
So the timing was terrible. If they
Yeah.
would have done it a few weeks earlier or later, there would have been no problem because
Yeah.
the bees wouldn't have been flocking to the trees.
But you're right. So, yeah, John sent that email out, and I said, well, this is precisely the sort of thing that integrated pest management seeks to avert.
Yeah.
So it was kind of on the heels of the initial recommendation.
But
Yeah.
no doubt they got a complaint about the
Well, yeah.
the honeydew dripping from
Right,
the trees, so
right.
they went ahead and sprayed without thinking. So-
Right. So that was tragic, and
I guess I don't understand what, the honeydews is kind of a natural function of the...
It's a natural function of insects that are sucking plant juices
Okay.
and excreting them.
Aphids
so
attack
aphids,
the tissue.
yeah.
Aphids are milked by the insects called, can't think. The little guys that crawl up and down. Okay. Ants. So thank you. Thank you. Bad moment there.
That's
okay?
why we have the mayor here. Remember stuff like this.
The person testifying was the mayor.
And Brian, you're right. It's, all the willow species, native willow species have this problem too.
Yeah,
with
well,
aphids,
there's a variety of trees that
And
do.
but integrated pest management decision-making probably wouldn't have led them to do the right thing. The right thing would have been to look at the impact of the honeydew drip on cars, I assume, and what they're willing to trade off by thinning or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know that IPM would have made a difference.
Yeah,
but, you know,
you seek not to
but
do
you're right,
anything.
timing would have made a huge difference there. It's
Yeah, it would
really
have.
sad.
And
Very sad.
I think your IPM can be, if you amend it, or if the city chooses to adopt the entirety of it or the portions of it, I think things like this we need to talk about, because there are appendices that talk about pesticides and their use and those kinds of things.
Yeah, the Tolbert farmers used to paint the trees with a sticky substance to keep that from happening, because they don't want their trees having the same problem.
Yeah.
Tanglefoot, it's called. That tangles up the feet of those little critters called ants. They can't get up there to do their milking job.
I have a question on this for Eric, I guess, on the IPM. So how's the district use that? I mean, I know your weed guy was on that committee.
Yeah,
so.
our WeedWise coordinator, actually 2 of our staff had, I think, quite a bit of input on the document, but I don't know to what extent we're following. I don't think it's an official document that we follow.
Right, and it's when you read that executive summary of that plan, it states it's not intended to be a regulatory document, but it's a series of policies that's you can follow fairly easily to better manage those kinds of things. So
I would think it would go hand in hand with a certain level of education of the people doing the application and managing the application and so on.
Yeah, and I think it's a kind of a baseline document that has an opportunity to be revised, by each community that adopts it to fit their needs, and if they want to make certain things more prominent, I think through the amendments you can do that. But
I should mention that our MS4 permit annual report is coming up again, so I guess this is timely, because we have to report back every year on that stormwater permit. So Gail Johnson has been in the loop on all the emails about the IPM that we've been sending out, and she's our coordinator for the MS4 update. So
that's good.
Yeah.
I'd sure like to ask a question of Eric regarding the Soil Water Conservation Service purchase of land out in Beaver Creek.
Yes.
Was that the Larry Scow property? Which had llamas in the past and has a pond and all sorts of stuff. All right, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar with who he is, he did a lot of habitat work. Not because he wanted to, because we roped him into doing it years ago. He got very good at it, too. But that farm has got ponds and all sorts of features that,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for demonstration projects out there. I think that's the
very
intent.
close to Beaver Creek Road, too. Good access, right?
Yeah.
Good deal.
So does that mean your primary site that I thought you were doing, where? Up near Jim, the garage, folks. What am I thinking of here? Basically down below Malala Avenue as it drops down the hill. That was a primary site you guys bought too, didn't you?
Yes, we purchased the property on Pleasant Avenue.
Pleasant Avenue.
Right across from our existing office. But I don't think long-term plans have been developed yet for either property. So
Okay.
It's in process.
Okay. Well, that Scow property is remarkable, in terms of potential, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Good deal.
I've got one other question on what's the status of the mitigation plan over on 205?
Oh.
What's going on there? It looks pretty dry to me.
I don't know. I can talk to Alita Froman Goodrich and report back at the next meeting. Yeah.
It's the huge retention basin. It appears to fill up with groundwater and runoff and then dry out fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So it's a wintertime only.
I know Walker Macy, the landscaping company, planning company, was looking at, what responses to, what's happening hydrologically out there in comparison to what they thought would happen.
I didn't think it would happen.
Huh?
I didn't think it would happen.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Yeah.
Was that
So
supposed to be
that was
year-round?
about 6 months ago, and I don't know what they've done since. Yeah.
Was that supposed to be a year-round water feature?
I
then,
don't
or-
think it was intended to be that.
No, I think it was to provide floodplain mitigation, and it would have a certain amount of what they call dead storage, maybe, in the bottom, and then it would fluctuate.
It would be interesting to see some photos that they must have taken during the mediation, during the monitoring, to see what was going on out there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think they're going to be bound to monitor it for at least another
Normally 5 years.
3 more years, yeah.
I understand that the little wetland near the sewer plant that's just off Washington Street they went back and sealed the bottom with bentonite to
Really?
retain enough water, and that has ended up being a year-round
Okay.
pond.
Well, yeah, I'll report back on that in August. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can I ask just quickly what our next steps are on the work plan?
Yeah, I think that we need to definitely keep after it. I think it would be real good for everyone to take a good hard look at anything you've got on it, and any additions or changes need to get brought up at the next meeting. If not, you can even send it to Pete ahead of time so it can get incorporated in a report.
You know, one thing that seems to help on the back end of kind of work plans is we can identify any goals, products, or outcomes that relate to what we're undertaking. So if we achieve it, we know what we're looking at, or we can, it's something to work towards, so we know whatever that item is, that if we had a product or an outcome or something tangible, it'd be neat to associate that with that work plan item.
Yeah, I think we did that a couple meetings ago. We talked about what we'd done based on our current work plan. But look back at that, and we got the heritage tree designation. We got the street tree list done, and a few other things. So, good job on those.
I actually heard maybe, you want to expand a little bit on what you're thinking? I mean, you talked about it earlier, but I think you think the work plan is a little light in terms of specifics.
Just point of order, we got 3 minutes left before the meeting stops automatically, so, okay.
Glad you said that.
So,
Yeah, I don't know. I looked at the suggestions here, and to me, it seems to just break down into 3 main areas. One is several of them refer to process and communication. Several of them refer to code review, revision, and then the rest of them are specific topics such as climate change or outdoor lighting, specific actionable subjects. So, yeah, I guess I would like to see a little more refined. What are the deliverables that we're producing from these?
Yeah. What goals do we want to have turn into outcomes?
Right.
How do we know if we're successful?
Yeah.
The city's a
Exactly.
greener place to be without ants.
I guess my only concern is I would prefer not to spend the entire year putting a work plan together. It's like,
Agreed.
it doesn't have to be incredibly complex, but I think it needs to be more detailed than what we've had in the past.
so what's our action item then,
Well, I think
Mr.
that
Chairman?
Well, our
That's for
action
the next
item for
meeting.
next time is make a cut. What you think that would look like? What is a goal that we want to turn into an outcome? We want a greener and better treed city. What steps are we taking to get there? Would we like to take to get there?
Well, that was just one item.
1 minute
I'm
left.
just using that as an
Okay,
example. That,
right,
you know,
right.
we need to comment on any
Well,
items that we're going to.
Okay, what I'm going to do is pass on my written changes, suggestions to Pete to send to Eric or whatever, because in the 3 areas that you identified, I think they're good, but they're not. I'm looking to refine them a little better, like Eric is. And I think those 3 areas actually cover a lot of area if we were to really do them. Review projects and practices.
Okay, extended the meeting.
Things like
30
that, you know.
The meeting has been extended 30 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm done.
Okay.
I didn't make this happen. Okay.
All right. So, is there further discussion on this issue or series of issues?
I move we adjourn.
Well, Richard, I think, has another word.
I guess, you know, I think we all agree that we need to have more specificity and, you know, in what we're doing, and we need to get through it quickly, you know?
Yeah.
And just move on to the next thing. So, right now, I'm a little concerned we're gonna come back next time, and we're gonna be sitting here doing the same thing,
Right.
you know?
Well, could I add a suggestion here?
Okay.
You know, we can add some of your, I would suggest that we tie in the top 3 into a new matrix of some kind, and then add some action items under that and rank them. And then I can do that before the next meeting and send it to you, so that we don't have to wait till the next meeting to see that. And then if we'll do that informally, and then have it ready, provide the feedback at the next meeting based on that. Yeah,
Pete,
Okay, that sounds workable.
I think the key thing about the process stuff, I think it's clear what it states, but what I don't think it's clear people would look at is how do we do it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to have better relations with XYZ committee or something like that, but we don't identify how that takes place, it won't happen.
No, I agree.
Well, basically, there needs to be a champion within the city that makes that happen.
Mhm.
And I don't think that person is there now, based on what Pete is saying.
Well, I think what we do is, you know, what I do as staff is, if I get a consensus recommendation from the committee, I send it forward to the management and see where it goes. And at that point, you know, I don't send it to the city commission until it's been through David Frazier's office, you know, so just so you know, and in the case of, for example, in the case of the integrated pest management, you guys, you made a consensus recommendation to recommend approval of that and see how it promulgates. And so what I sent forward is, like, at the meeting, there was a consensus recommendation to adopt this. We sent it forward to the management and for comment and feedback from the various departmental managers to see how they want to go forward. It doesn't change, in my mind, it doesn't change the validity of the recommendation because you've already looked at it in detail.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is we haven't come to you, you know, with each department having signed off on that IPM beforehand, because it's already a best management practice that can be adopted and amended by whatever agency sees fit to do so. You know, it's fairly, I think in our minds, it was a fairly non-controversial recommendation to make. It wasn't something that really trod on anybody's toes, because you're not saying, you know, you're doing that. So, and I stressed that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a widely accepted document at this point.
Yeah. It has public agency support. Yeah. So that's one example. In other examples, for example, the Heritage Tree Code, we're waiting for comments from the city attorney before we make a recommendation to the Planning Commission and City Commission. And if you're, you know, I think you're comfortable with that approach, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, any more discussion? Okay, our next scheduled meeting date is August 14th, as you probably all have noticed already. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Good.